B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Moed Katan Daf Yud Aleph. We're going to start from the next Mishnah, 11 lines from the top of the Omid. Says the Mishnah, Oisin Ma'ke Legag. If you have a roof or ulam marpeset, a type of a gallery where it's dangerous, people could fall off, and it's important that there's a railing or a small wall that can be put on the edge of these roofs, then one is allowed to do that on Chol HaMoed, Ma'aseh Hedyot, on condition that it's an amateur type of work and not a skilled work. Avaloi Ma'aseh Uman, it mustn't be the work of a skilled craftsman. Another halacha, says the Mishnah, Shofin es hasdokim, one's allowed to smear plaster onto the cracks in an oven. Uma'agilin, and one is allowed to flatten the surfaces of the oven. Uma'agilin oison b'ma'agilo, one's allowed to flatten them using a roller, biyad uberegel, and using one's hand and foot to be able to flatten the base of the oven where you've smeared it and where it needs flattening, and you've closed up the cracks at the bottom of the oven. Then you're allowed to then use a roller or a hand and your foot to smoothen it. But you're not allowed to use a type of a trowel or type of a block that they would use, because that's much more of a professional way of doing it, and that would be osar on Chol HaMoed. Continues the Mishnah, Hatzir, the pivot, Vatzinor, the socket, Vakoira, the lintel on top of a door, Vamanoil, the lock, Vamafteach, or the key, and these are all wooden parts of a door. Shenishbur, if they got broken, Masaknon b'moed, you're allowed to repair them on Chol HaMoed. Uvilvad shelo yiskavin la'asos melachte b'moed, on condition that were they broken before Chol HaMoed, you didn't intentionally delay repairing them on Chol HaMoed, because that's osa. But if you didn't intentionally delay it and they needed repairing on Chol HaMoed, one's allowed to do that. Continues the Mishnah, V'chol kvoshim, any type of food that you want to pickle, shehu yochel lechel mehen b'moed, that pickling them is done in a way where it's not going to be too salty and too processed that you cannot eat them on Chol HaMoed and Yom Tov. But if it's yochel lechel mehen b'moed, if you can still benefit from pickling them over the Yom Tov, then kovshon, you're allowed to pickle them on Chol HaMoed. Says the Gemara, we saw at the beginning of the Mishnah that one's allowed to build a railing or fencing on a roof or a merpeset, a gallery, on Chol HaMoed, but only if it's a Ma'aseh Hedyot, if it's not a skilled work. How would one make a wall without skilled work? Rav Yosef Omar, and we already saw this on Daf Zayin, Rav Yosef says, Behutz of a Daphne, you can use different branches to make this wall. And b'masnitaton, in a brisa we learnt tzor b'tzroir, that you can just pile up a pile of stones on the edge of the roof, ve'enoi toch betit, but not to smear them with cement and mortar. That you're not allowed to do on Chol HaMoed. Continues the Gemara that we saw in the Mishnah that shofin es hasdokin, one's allowed to smear plaster on the cracks in an oven, um'agilin oison, and one's allowed to flatten them b'magilo, with a roller, and biyad uberegel, and with one's bare hands and foot. Hashtas asks the Gemara, if b'magilo omros shori, once the Mishnah says that you're allowed to use a magilo, which is a more professional way of smoothing the oven surfaces, biyad uberegel miboya, then using just your bare hands or foot to smoothen the filled up cracks, to smoothen the plaster on the base of the oven, on the surfaces of the oven, then doing it with your bare hands and foot, which is much less of a professional type of work, you can take it for granted you'd be allowed to do that, because you're even allowed to use a magila, which is a roller, to do that. Answers the Gemara, Hochi K'omar. The way you have to read the Mishnah is Shofin es hasdokin, that you're allowed to smooth you're allowed to smear plaster on the cracks, umagilin, and to flatten them, umagilin oison ke'en magilo, not with a roller, but you can do it similar to a magilo, which a magilo itself is a more professional and skilled way of doing it. But even though you can get similar results, but doing it biyadu beregel, doing it in an unskilled, unprofessional way, that is allowed on Chol HaMoed. Avaloi b'machalotzim, but you're not allowed to use a trowel, a tool, to smoothen the surfaces of the oven. Continues the Gemara, Hatzir v'atzinoir v'akoiro v'amanuel v'amafteach, which are the different parts of the wooden parts of a door frame, the lock. Shenishbur, if they got broken, masaknon b'moed, you're allowed to fix them on Chol HaMoed. Asks the Gemara or Raminu, this seems to contradict a different Mishnah. There's another Mishnah in Ma'aseh Sheni that says that Ad Yomov, until the times of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, Hoyopatish Makeh b'Yerushalayim v'chulu, the sound of the hammer would be heard in Yerushalayim on Chol HaMoed. However, and then the Mishnah continues that he made a gezerah, and he said that you're no longer allowed to use any tools that make a noise on Chol HaMoed, or you're not allowed to use any instruments while working on Chol HaMoed. So says the Gemara, from that Mishnah it's apparent that Ad Yomov that you would only hear the sound of a hammer till the days of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. Mikan ve'elach, but from the days of Yochanan Kohen Gadol and on, they would no longer use these tools. So how can you say here that you can fix all these parts of the door on Chol HaMoed and you need to use these tools in order to fix them? How are you going to do that? Answers the Gemara, Loi Kashya. Kan b'denafchi. When did Yochanan Kohen Gadol say that you're not allowed to use this hammer to make a noise? It's talking about a blacksmith. And the hammer of a blacksmith and the banging of a blacksmith was very loud. But kan b'denagri, here we're talking about wooden parts. It's just the carpentry, and the sound of fixing wooden pieces is not as loud and aggressive as that of a blacksmith's hammer, and therefore that's allowed, as it says in our Mishnah. Maskif Lor of Chisda asked on this, Yoimru, are you going to now say, if this answer is right, people will say, Kolorako, Koloraba osur, if it's very loud, it's osur. Kolozutter, if it's not so loud, it's mutter. How are people going to determine what's called loud, what's not called loud? Everyone's going to decide on their own. It's not very defined. Ela Omer of Chisda says we have another way of explaining the contradiction. Loi Kashya, our Mishnah is talking about b'magli. It's talking about these large saws, and the saw typically doesn't make any sound. However, when Yochanan Kohen Gadol said that it was was talking about using axes, and axes make noise. So it's not about a lot of noise or a little bit of noise. It's about, are you using a tool that makes noise, or are you using a tool that does not make noise? Rav Papa gives a different explanation. Kan koidim gzeira. Our Mishnah is indeed talking about before Yochanan Kohen Gadol said it was asa. Kan lachar gzeira. The other Mishnah is telling us that Yochanan Kohen Gadol decreed that it's asa. Rav Ashi gives a different answer. Ha Rabbi Yehuda. When Yochanan Kohen Gadol said it was asa, that was Rabbi Yehuda. Because Rabbi Yehuda says, and we're going to learn about this later on Daf Yud Beis, that Rabbi Yehuda says that when you do work on Chol HaMoed, it has to be done with a shinui. It has to be done in an unusual way. So that's what Yochanan Kohen Gadol said. You were not allowed to use those tools in a normal way. Ha Rabbi Yosi, but our Mishnah that says you are allowed to is Rabbi Yosi. And Rabbi Yosi says that you're allowed to do work on Chol HaMoed, those work that you're allowed to do, which is, for example, when you would have a loss, if you didn't do it, like fixing the door, fixing the locks, then Rabbi Yosi says, we'll see this on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, Rabbi Yosi says you do not need to do it in an unusual way, and that's our Mishnah that says that you're allowed to fix these door parts on Chol HaMoed. The Omer Rabbi Yitzchok bar Avdimi, and we're going to see this on Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis, Man Tana, which Tana holds that Shinui b'moed b'davar ha'oved, that when you do something in order to prevent loss, and you're allowed to do those activities on Chol HaMoed, that you have to do it with a Shinui in an unusual way. Like Rabbi Yosi, it's not like Rabbi Yosi, because it's like Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yosi says that you do not need a Shinui. Continues the Gemara, Omer Ravina. Ravina says, Kaman madlinon ha'idna kabiyusa dedasha. According to which opinion do we allow today to put up the lintel which is over the door, the piece of wood which is above the door on which the door closes? If the pegs holding that lintel came away, you're allowed to fix them back up. B'chol HaMoed, you're allowed to do that in a regular way, in a regular fashion on Chol HaMoed. Who is that? Kaman Rabbi Yosi. It's following Rabbi Yosi that we just said. According to Rabbi Yosi, you're allowed to, those things that you're allowed to do to prevent loss, you're allowed to do them in a usual manner on Chol HaMoed. Continues the Gemara, if you want to pickle some foods, but you'll be able to use those pickled foods and eat them and benefit from them on Yom Tov and Chol HaMoed and Yom Tov, Kovshon, you're allowed to pickle them on Chol HaMoed. Says the Gemara, Badisa Lavoi, the river Badisa, in the place of Lavoi, Kavri, it dried out. There's different explanations exactly what's going on here. Either it dried out completely, or the water levels went down and the fish got trapped in the cavities in the base of this river. So Ozel Kuli Alma, all the people came, Tzud, in order to catch the fish, and Tzud, Aisi Kavra, in order to catch and bring home the fish. Once they brought their fish home, and they brought home a tremendous amount of fish. Rava said that you've got so much fish here, then you're allowed to, even though you will not be able to benefit from the fish which are salted, because when something gets very salted, you can't just eat it. You have to, there's a whole process of rinsing it and squeezing the saltiness out of it. And if you're going to salt fish on Chol HaMoed, you're certainly not going to be able to benefit from them. Nonetheless, Rava said you're allowed to salt these fish on Chol HaMoed. Omale Abaya asked, V'hotnan, did we not learn in our Mishnah that kvoshim shu yochel echel men b'moed, only those types of pickled foods that you would be able to actually benefit from them over Yom Tov, kovshon, you're allowed to pickle on Chol HaMoed? How could Rava allow them to salt these fish when it was clear that they would not be able to benefit from these fish over the Yom Tov period? Omarli. So Rava said to Abaya, since when they initially took the fish, they brought them home with the intentions of eating them over Chol HaMoed and Yom Tov. And now that you've got so many extra fish in the house, and it's became clear to them that they are not going to be able to eat them, if you're just going to leave them till after Yom Tov, posti, they're going to spoil. And therefore it has the same halacha as kaprakmatya ha'oved domi. It's got like merchandise that if you don't sell it on Chol HaMoed, you're going to make a loss. Not just you won't gain, it's actually going to give you losses. The Vashari, you're allowed to do that on Chol HaMoed. So Rava said, since now that they have the fish, if they don't salt it, they will get lost. You're allowed to salt them on Chol HaMoed. V'ikud Omra, a different version was, not that they first brought home all the fish, and then Rava said, now that you have the fish, you can salt them. No. But Rava initially told them, Shari luhu Rava allowed them Meitzad Meizal to catch and to go and to V'aisiyu and to bring umimlach and to salt them. He initially told them, go to where all those fish are, bring all those fish and salt whatever you don't need for Yom Tov. So there, it's a much worse situation. There Rava said you can initially go and take them. And Abaya again asked Omale Abaya, V'anan kvoshim shu yochel lechel men kovshon tanan. In our Mishnah, did it not say you're only allowed to pickle those foods that you're actually going to be able to benefit from on Chol HaMoed? Omerli. So Rava answered to Abaya in this version, Hani nami misakli. Even these fish, we've taken it for granted till now that salted fish are so salted you cannot eat it. No. There is a way that you can eat even very salted fish. Agav at itzitza. If you soak them and press them, and different explanations exactly what itzitza means, but if you press and soak the fish, then you can remove the saltiness, and then you can actually benefit and enjoy that fish even though it was salted. Kihad Shmuel Avdulei Shitin Itzitza v'ochal. It will happen with Shmuel that they have salted fish, and they did this itzitza process with it 60 times, and then he could eat them. Rava ikla lebei Resh Galusa. Rava was visiting the home of the Resh Galusa. Avdulei shitin itzitza. And again they took salted fish. They did this itzitzi, the soaking, the washing, the pressing 60 times. V'ochal, and then it was ready to be eaten. Rav ikla lebei Rav Shfir. Rav was visiting the home of Rav Shfir, and Aisul Kameahu Kavra. They brought him some fish. Tilsa a third bishula was boiled. Tilsa a third milcha was salted, and you can't eat just regular salted fish. It's too salty. Obviously, they would do itzitza to it to make it fit to be eaten. Tilsa tavya, and a third of it was broiled, was roasted. And that's how they gave Rav to eat. So here again you see that it's possible to to do something to salted fish that you can actually eat it. So Rava said to the people, go bring the fish, salt them, and it's still going to be able to be used on Chol HaMoed and Yom Tov, should you want to. Continues the Gemara, a few statements of Rav concerning fish. Omar Rav, Omar li Ado Tzaida. Ado the fisherman told me that kavra, fish, somuch l'misrechei mali. It's better, it's more beneficial to eat fish not soon after you've caught it, but much later, closer to the time where it's already going to get ruined, and eating it later on is more beneficial. V'omar Rav, another statement from Rav, Omar li Ado Tzaido, Ado the fisherman told me that kavra, regarding the fish, tavyo, you should roast it or broil it, and ba'achua, in the brother of the fish, which is salt, because a fish is typically in the sea, in salty water. So there's a lot of a connection between the fish and the salt. So he said that you should roast the fish in its brother in salt. Asikua, you should put it ba'avua, in its father, referring to water. Michla bebrei, you should eat it together with the fish juices, which is like a son of the fish, it comes out of the fish. Ishti oleavua, and after you've eaten the fish, you should drink the father of the fish, again referring to drinking water. V'omar Rav, another statement from Rav, Omer li Ado Tzaida, Ado the fisherman told me that kavra, that fish, and tochli, cress, v'chalba, and milk, lit in gufa, you should rather burden your body after eating either fish, cress, or milk, that you should do some exercise, some physical activity, v'lo lit in puria, rather than straight away burdening your bed, which means don't go to sleep immediately after you've eaten cress, fish, or drunk milk. V'omar Rav, a final statement from Rav, Omer li Ado Tzaido, Ado the fisherman told me, kavro tachle v'chalba, which is the fish, cress, and milk, maya v'lo shichra, after eating them, you should rather drink water than drink beer, shichra v'lo chamra, rather drink beer than drink wine. Hadron aloch mashkin beis hashlochim, b'siyata dishmai, we finished learning Perek Mashkin beis hashlochim, and in Mirz Hashem we're going to review this Perek, and we're going to immediately carry on Yud Aleph Amud Beis, the next Perek. Second Perek of Moed Katan, Perek Misha Hofach. Says the Mishnah, Misha Hofach as Zeisov, if somebody turned over the olives in a vat, typically they would put all the olives into a vat where they would pressure each other, they would get warmed up, and it was a whole process, and after there'd been a certain amount of time in these vats, they would then turn them over, and after they've been turned over, then they would be poured into the olive press, and the beam would be placed on them a few times, but the beam would be placed on them to be pressed. So Misha Hofach Hazeisov, if somebody has already turned over the olives in the vat, and now it's ready to be poured into the press, V'iru Evel, and suddenly this person became an oval, one of his 7 relatives passed away, father, mother, wife, son, daughter, brother, sister, and he's now in mourning, and midrabanon, he's not allowed to do any work. What should he do? Is he allowed to now take these olives and put them into the press? Oy oinus, or some other unforeseen circumstance happened, and now we're talking about before Yom Tov, that he had prepared and turned over these olives, and something happened and he didn't have the opportunity to put the olives into the press. Or if some workers misled him, they said they were going to come and put it into the press, they didn't come, and now it's Chol HaMoed. What should we do? If we just leave these olives in the vat in a turned over state and not put them in the press, they're going to get ruined. It's Chol HaMoed. You shouldn't do work on Chol HaMoed. What can you do? Says the Mishnah, To'ein Koira Rishona. You can put the beam onto that means you can put the olives into the press and put the beam on top of the olives, but just once. Typically they would do it once, and then they would take the olives out and grind them, and then put them back in the press and squeeze them again. On Chol HaMoed, you're only allowed to do it once, where the majority of the oil will ooze out of it at that first pressing, and therefore it's no longer such a big loss, whatever's left, and therefore manichol achar moed, you leave it like that till after Yom Tov. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that was the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi said, Zoilef, you're allowed to pour the olives into the press, V'goimer, and you can finish the whole process, V'gof, and you can seal up the oil after it's been pressed, and after the oil has been poured off, you're allowed to seal it off, V'kadarkoi, all in a regular fashion. Rabbi Yossi holds that once you're allowed to do a certain malacha, you're allowed to finish the entire malacha. Asks the Gemara, Posach ba'ovel, you started the Mishnah saying that you've turned over these olives in the vat, and now either he became an oval, or an oinus happened and Chol HaMoed came along. So that's two separate compartments. There's he became an oval, or it became Chol HaMoed. And then the Mishnah continues and says that that you can put the beam onto the olives for just once and wait till after Yom Tov. Okay, so you've told me exactly what to do with Chol HaMoed. You haven't told me whether an oval, somebody in mourning, what can he do? You started off speaking about oval, v'sayim b'moed, but then when you finished off, you only spoke about Chol HaMoed, not the oval. So there's going to be two explanations in the Gemara. Omer of Shisha Breder of Idi. If Shisha Breder of Idi says, Zois oimeres devorim hamutorim b'moed asurim b'mei evloi. Rav Shisha says there's a good reason the Mishnah doesn't say that what to do when he's an oval. Because when he's an oval, he can't do anything. When it's Chol HaMoed, you can put the beam on the olives. But when he's an oval, he can't do anything. Rav Ashi says no, on the contrary. It's easier to do malachas as an oval than to do malachas on Chol HaMoed. So if the Mishnah says what you can do on Chol HaMoed, you can certainly do that as an oval as well. Rav Ashi Omar, Loi mi boya k'omar. Loi mi boya, not only b'mei evloi, when he's in mourning, the midrabanon hu, that the issa to do malachas during the week of mourning is only rabbinical. V'shori, and it's mutter. Obviously, if you're doing it in order to prevent loss, because midrabanon, you're not allowed to work during the week of mourning. Elo afilu b'moed, even on Chol HaMoed, the issa malacha midoraisa. And we've mentioned previously that the Gemara says in Chagiga Daf Yud Ches that the Torah says that there are certain malachas, certain things you're not allowed to do on Chol HaMoed. The issa of working, obviously the guidelines are given to us by the Chachomim, but the essence of the issa is biblical, b'mokim pseida. And if it's nonetheless, because it's in order to avoid losing all these olives, Shoru Rabbanon, the Rabbanon said, you're allowed to do it. So that is Rav Ashi's answer, is that the Mishnah tells us what you can do on Chol HaMoed, and you can take it for granted that anything you can do on Chol HaMoed, you can also do during the week of mourning. Tanya Kavoseder of Shisha Breder of Idi, we have a brisa which seems to say like Rav Shisha, that even though certain things to prevent loss are allowed to be done on Chol HaMoed, they're not allowed to be done during Avelis. And the brisa goes as follows. It's a long brisa. Eilu devorim, the following things that ha'oisim, other people can do le'oval, for an oval b'mei evloi, which means the oval is not allowed to do it, but somebody else can do it for him. What are they? Zeisav afuchim, if he's got olives that have already been turned over in the vat, turnim lo, you're allowed to put it into the press and put the beam on top of it to press them. Others can do it. He cannot do it himself. Others can do it for him. And this is like Rav Shisha said, that the oval himself is not allowed to press these olives. And continues the brisa. V'kadoi loguf, if he's got a barrel that needs to be sealed, or pishtoinoi lehalos min hamishra, or if you have to bring out the flax from the pool where they're being soaked, v'tzamroi lalos min hayoira, or if he has to take out the wool from the vat of dye. Umarbitzin sodeyu kushetagia oines hamayim sheloi. Typically, the custom was that they would split up with the water to irrigate the fields. They would say every day a different owner, a different person, a different field owner can water his field or fields. And if this person is an oval, if he's going to miss his day, he's not going to have the water. He's going to have a loss. So other people are allowed to marbitzin sodeyu, can water his field mishetagia oines hamayim sheloi, when it's his turn to use the water. All this others can do for him. He cannot do it himself because he's an oval. Rabbi Yehuda says, Af zayrin lo sode, stay near. If he's got a ploughed field, then you have to sow, you have to plant quite soon after you've done the ploughing. Because if you don't plant soon, you won't be able to plant straight away. It won't grow as quickly, and therefore it's a loss for him. And if this person who became an oval, he's had a ploughed field, others can sow the field for him. or a field that's been designated for flax, you have to plant the flax immediately, because if you delay, you will not be able to plant the flax then because you can only plant flax at a certain point in time. So Rabbi Yehuda said these two things, they are also to prevent loss. Others can do it for the oval. Amrullah, the Chachamim said to Rabbi Yehuda, Imloi tizra bebachir, tizra be'efel. He says, even a ploughed field, there's no reason you should be allowed to do it for the oval. It's true that if you can't plant it straight away, then the fruits are going to delay in becoming ripe and in growing. Okay, so you'll plant it. If you cannot plant the early season, you'll plant with the later season, but that's not a reason to allow other people to do the work for him. And regarding the field with the flax, Imloi tizra pishton, tizra mimin acher. If you cannot plant flax in the field, plant something else in the field. So it's only going to be a marginal, minimal loss, and therefore even others are not allowed to do it for the person in mourning. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Zeisov hafuchim. And it's not clear if Reb Shimon ben Gamliel is actually arguing with the Tanna Kama or not, but he says that if you have Zeisov hafuchim, if you've got these olives that have been turned over in the vat and are waiting to be put into the press, Ve'en sham uman elohu, and this person in mourning is the only one who's skilled to be able to put the olives into the press. Or kadoi lokuf, or if he's got a barrel that needs to be sealed, Ve'en sham uman elohu, and he's the only one skilled enough to seal his barrel, but he's in mourning. Or pishtoine lehalos min hamishra, or to take out the flax from where it's being soaked. V'tzamroi lehalos min hayera, or to take the wool out of the dye. Ve'en sham uman elohu, and he's the only skilled person who can do it. Harei ze yaseh b'tzina. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says he shouldn't do it in public, but in the quiet he's allowed to do it. Yeser al kein amar Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel said even more than that. Im haya uman lerabim, if this person was a skilled person that used to serve the public, V'safar, he was a barber, v'balon, or he was a bathhouse attendant, l'rabim, serving the public, v'gia eis haregel, and now it's Yom Tov time, but he's in mourning, and nobody else can do what he can do. Ve'en sham uman elohu, he's the only one skilled enough to serve the public this way. Harei ze yaseh, even though he's in mourning, he's allowed to do it, and even though it's in public, and everyone will see him. Since nobody else can do it, he's allowed to do it in order that it shouldn't be a big loss for him and for the public. Continues the Braisa. Ha'arisin v'hachakirin v'hakablonim harei elu yasu achirin bishvilon. Now, arisin, chakirin, and kablonim are three different types of workers. We'll just very briefly outline the difference between them, but these are going to be sugyas later on that discuss the fine details. An oris is somebody who takes a field from the owner, and he pays the owner, the payment to the owner of the field is a certain percentage of what grows in the field. That's an oris. A chachir is somebody who also takes the field from the owner, and he pays the owner not a percentage of what grows, but a certain fixed amount of what grows, which means like 5 kilos, 10 kilos, or pounds, however you weigh things, or however you measure things. It's not like the oris that X percentage of what grows is going to go to the owner. No, we're going to predetermine a certain amount of produce that grows. In the event that it does grow, that's going to be given to the owner of the field as payment for use of the field. That's a chochir. A kablon is somebody who's simply paid for his work. He gets a fixed wage to do his work. So if you're working in a field as a kablon, you're going to get paid for doing your work, nothing to do with what grows. You're going to get a fixed salary, a fixed wage. So these three, in the event that they are avelim and they shouldn't be working in that week of mourning, because if they're going to suddenly stop their work, it's going to be a very large loss for them and for the owners of the field or the owners of the property, and therefore others can do this work for them. Hachamorim, people who lease out their donkeys to other people, or gamolin, people who lease out their camels, vasafonim, or people who lease out their boats. Harei elu, then in the event that these people are in mourning, lo yasu, they shouldn't start a new lease while they're in mourning. Vim hoyu muchorim oy muskorim etzel acherim, but if either they themselves all their animals, their donkeys, if either they as donkey riders, camel riders, or people with the boats, or their boats, if either way, if they themselves have already been hired out, and then they became avelim, harei luyasu, they are allowed to do their work, because otherwise they will incur extra loss to themselves and to the people who have employed them. Schir yoim, if somebody's been hired just for the day, then, and the halacha is that a person who's hired for the day, if he stops halfway, he's allowed to stop halfway, and he will get paid for what he did till then. So this person is a schir yoim, and in the middle of the day he became in mourning, one of his relatives passed away. Afilu be'ir acheres, even if he's in another city and people there don't know that he's in mourning, don't know that one of his relatives passed away, so they won't think that he's working in a prohibited fashion. Lo yase, he's not allowed to continue working, because the halacha is that an oval is not allowed to work, and he's not going to incur extra loss, because what he's already worked for the first part of the day, he will get paid for. If this person has other people's work in his hands, then, for example, you have something in your hand that you're committed to do for somebody else, even though that he's a kablon and he's going to be paid just for the job as of itself, lo yase, he's not allowed to do it whilst he's in mourning. And now the Gemara interjects with an interesting question. The words afal pisha b'kiboiles, it would seem that if it's kiboiles, if it's kablon, there would be more reason that he can do the work. And that's why it says afal pisha b'kiboiles, even though he's a kablon, he cannot work as in mourning. And that's very interesting, because a kablon is the most reason not to be allowed to do the work, because he's not committed to time. He can do the work whenever he wants. He's getting paid to do the job. He's not committed to time. He's in his own hands. So that would be a reason not to let him do the work. So why is he saying, Afal pi, even though he's a kablon, he can't do the work? Asks the Gemara, Afal pi shabakipoiles, even though he's a kablon. And that would tell us that it's even more simple to understand if he's not a kablon that he can't do the work. Adarab, on the contrary. Kiboiles, when he's a kablon, kadidei, he's in his own hands. So there I may have thought that it's easy to understand that he can't do it as an oval, he should do it after the week of mourning. But if he's not a kablon and he's committed to time, maybe there he can do it in mourning. Elo'ema, what you have to read into the Braisa is bein kiboiles, irrespective of whether he's a kablon, and bein she'eno kiboiles, even if he's not a kablon, lo yase, he's not allowed to do the work, because he has to wait till after the mourning period is over. Continues the Braisa, if there's a work that this person needed done and other people were going to do the work, and this work, his utensils or whatever needs to be done is in the hands of the other people, and now this person became an oval, he's in mourning. So bebeisoi, in his own home, lo yasu. Those other people should not do the work for him in his own home, because people will think that you hired them during the time of mourning, which is osir, or they'll think you're helping him, which is osir, and in his home, don't do it. Bebeis achir, yasu, in a different house, if you've been told before the mourning started, please do this work for this person became an oval, as long as you're not in his house, you can do the work whenever you want. Yasu, you can do the work. Continues the Gemara, Meryon Bereider Rovin. Meryon, son of Rovin, Umar Bereider of Acha Bereider Rova, and this Mar, who was the son of Reb Acha, the son of Rova, they had Havaluhu Hahu Gamlo de Tura. They had this yoke of oxen. Bahadi Adodi, they had 2 oxen that would work together with a yoke. Isra Bey Milsa B'Mar Bereider of Acha Bereider Rova. This Mar, something unfortunate happened to him and he was in mourning. And now, if he's in mourning, we said that his animals shouldn't really be doing the work. Uposke, he removed his ox legamle from the yoke. Even though Meryon is now left with a yoke with only 1 ox and he couldn't work. But that's what Mar did. Omer Ravashi asked, Gavar Rabba Kamar Bereider Ravacha, a great person, a learned person like Mar Bereider Ravacha, Ovid Hochi would do this? We can understand he wasn't concerned for his own, he wasn't worried about his own loss. Was he not concerned that he was going to cause a loss to Meryon? We saw in the Brisa till now that in order to prevent loss to other people, if your animal's been hired out to other people and then you become an oval, the animals can continue working in order that the others shouldn't have a loss. Tanya, did we not learn in the Brisa that if your animals are hired out to somebody else, then in order that not you and not the people who have hired the animals should make a loss, they're allowed to continue working. Answers the Gemara, V'hu Sovar Mar Bereder of Acha, he held Adam Choshuv Shani, a prominent person should be stringent. It's true that a regular person, his animal would be allowed to continue working even though he's in mourning. But for a prominent person, it's worthy of being stringent. And the Mefarshim here discussed that it's very good you want to be stringent, but you've caused a loss, a damage to Meryon, who can't use his ox now, and some say he actually paid Meryon for those losses. He just wanted to be stringent, that his animal should not be working whilst he was in the week of mourning. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, in the next shir, we're going to continue from here.